Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to our virtual EDI summit here at the Greater Manchester Chamber. Glad to have everyone back joining us, and hope you enjoyed our conversation with Commissioner Caswell yesterday. We're back today with our second installment with DOT Commissioner Victoria Sheehan, who I'm going to introduce in just a moment, but we always enjoy talking to Commissioner Sheehan at this event each year, and did not want the change in format to get in the way of that. So really appreciate her making some time to speak with us. Just a few housekeeping items. I want to again thank our sponsors for making this program possible and their longtime continued support of the Chamber and our work in this area. Economic development infrastructure is really a backbone of our economy and business climate, so we really value the ability to work on these issues and bring you information and connect you with speakers and resources on these important topics. Our presenting sponsor is Comcast. Thanks to Brian Christensen and the team at Comcast for their support and remarks yesterday. Our corporate sponsors are Citizens Bank and Northeast Delta Dental. Our advocate sponsors are Amoskeag Industries, Bedford Cost Segregation, and Eversource Energy and TF Moran. And our season sponsors are Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare and also, again, TF Moran. So thank you again to all of our sponsors for your support. We really appreciate it, and look forward to continuing to work with you all in the future. So in just a minute, I'm going to start the conversation with Commissioner Sheehan, but just a reminder on format, we want to keep this conversational and interactive for you. So please drop comments into the chat on the right-hand side of your screen. And along the bottom, there's also an Ask a Question feature where you can drop questions in. You can upvote on other questions that have been submitted. And we're going to try and get to as many questions as we can. I have a bunch of topics and questions to tee up with the commissioner, but again, we want to connect with you all and understand what topics you're interested in hearing about. So with that, Commissioner Sheehan, thank you so much for being here and for your support of this event. I wonder if you could just start by just giving us a little bit of an update that, COVID-19 has obviously had an impact on every aspect of our lives, really, and all of the operation of our state government. And wondering if you can share just a general update on what 2020 has been like for DOT. What have been some of the challenges that the pandemic have presented to your department, and what are you kind of looking ahead at that are the kind of the big challenges that you're hoping to get through? Obviously, with the winter bearing down on us, is always a busy time for you. Oh, I think we lost the commissioner. We'll be back in just a second.
Can you hear me, Mike? All right, well, it's great to be with you in this virtual format. I'm very pleased the Chamber was able to find a way to continue to offer this infrastructure program. I've been really pleased to have the chance to support this particular event annually, and I'm glad we're not missing a beat this year despite the challenges of COVID-19. Your question is a complex one. COVID-19 has really impacted every aspect of the work that we do at the DOT and every mode of transportation. And we are a multimodal DOT, so we have responsibilities for aeronautics, rail and transit, as well as the highway system. But our first priority from the beginning has been the health and well-being of our employees, as well as any of the individuals that use our system. So immediately we went to work making sure that we had guidelines and procedures in place to keep everybody working throughout the COVID-19 pandemic, and it has in some respects been business as usual, and we've tried to keep things as normal as possible. So for example, on the construction side of the house, the timing of COVID-19 was such that our summer construction programs were predetermined. Most of the contracts had already been awarded, and so we worked very closely with AGC, the Associated General Contractors, to make sure that together we could keep all of the workers involved in our construction project safe. And then while we had some supply chain issues, the one positive of the reduced traffic volumes we saw on our highways was that it gave us an opportunity to accelerate some work, and in some cases take what was planned as night work and perform that during the day, which was safer and more efficient for all of us. So though it wasn't all negative in the early days, there were some benefits. Unfortunately though, with the revenue uncertainty, we did have to take a close look at our work plans that we had developed for the upcoming season, and there were some tasks that we deferred. We really focused this summer on our routine maintenance rather than taking on quite so many of the larger scale projects that our own forces would have completed. And then on the engineering and administration side, we very quickly pivoted to essentially full telework. Because we have over 1,000 employees who have to come to work, whether that's to do inspections, material testing, or oversee those construction activities, we thought it was really important that our engineering staff work from home because they were capable of doing that, and that allowed us to focus our efforts on keeping those who did have to come to work safe every day. So we have tried our best to keep things moving forward, but I'm not going to say it's been easy. The other modes of transportation, I'll just touch on those briefly. I know that Ted Kitchens from the airport will be speaking to this group tomorrow, so I won't dwell too much on the impacts in terms of how our airports have had to pivot. But on the public transportation side in particular, I really commend all of the local transit agencies and rural transit providers who have been doing everything that they could to make sure that they provided at least a basic level of service throughout the pandemic. Some of those providers did have to suspend their fixed route, so their routine bus services, but many times they were offering demand response and scheduled bus service for those individuals who rely on them to get to the grocery store or to get to work each day. So we were working very closely with all of those providers to understand what their needs were and support them in any way that the department could, and then also be an advocate for them. And we were fortunate. We have not received any federal assistance in terms of funding to support our lost revenue on the highway side of the house, but we did through the CARES Act receive funding for our airports and for our public transit providers.
One question I have is with the stay-at-home order that was in place in April, May, June, that time frame. Are you able to kind of give us a sense of exactly how much behaviors were changing at that time? Do you guys track the usage on the roads and highways, and are there any numbers you can put behind that? Because to us, I think everyone was, to their credit, did their best to embrace that and follow the guidelines. So it had to be a pretty dramatic change in how we were using our infrastructure for a defined period of time that was unlike anything that we would normally experience.
So we are very fortunate because of the equipment that we have installed on our highways. We were able to real-time monitor how usage was changing. So for example, all of our toll plazas have traffic counters, so we know both what revenue we're collecting as well as how many vehicles are going through those plazas every day. We also have automated counters on our non-turnpike roadways, as well as manual counters that we can go out and download data from periodically. So real time, we've been able to track what's happening in the southern part of the state where we saw the most significant drop-off in traffic volumes. And then weekly, every 2 weeks, we've been going out to the regional counters. So for all the major corridors in the state, we understand how travel patterns have evolved, both during the full stay-at-home order and then as different sectors of our economy have flexed back open, how that has then impacted the usage of the highway. And as much as we are concerned about revenue, we really commend the people of New Hampshire for doing the right thing, for taking the governor's direction seriously, and we definitely saw the results. As an executive order was issued, we were instantly able to monitor what was happening on our highways and see how people were responding. And so at the height of the crisis on our turnpike system, we saw about a 55% reduction in traffic volumes. And statewide, it was around a 50% average. Over the course of the summer, we were really pleased to see the numbers come back. I think while people weren't really leaving New England and traveling as far this summer, and certainly we didn't have the international visitors and others that we normally welcome to New Hampshire, there was a lot of recreational travel. It was great to see so many people get outside and enjoy the outdoors, and we certainly saw the traffic volumes climb. And we had a great fall. It was a great year for foliage, and with a nice, dry, hot summer, people definitely took advantage of that. Of course, there's the downsides from the drought perspective, but it did mean that people were able to get outdoors. So at this point, our traffic volumes in the southern part of the state are still down about 15 to 17%, where elsewhere in the state they're down about 12%. So certainly, with a lot of people still teleworking, with some school systems still in either hybrid or fully remote models, we're not seeing the same use of the system, but things are getting closer to normal.
That disparity between the southern part of the state and other regions is kind of interesting, that 5% gap. I wonder if that is in part attributable to a concentration of workers in the southern part of the state who remote work to Massachusetts or other places and have more flexibility to stay closer to home. It seems like that, that trend, unless that you account for a difference like that, it would be consistent across the state. So that's interesting.
Definitely seeing very different commuting patterns. The commute, while traffic has rebounded, we're not seeing the peaks that we were previously, and the overall duration has somewhat extended. So we're just seeing less traffic at peak hours, but traffic, spread out across the day. Myself included, it's very easy now with technology to do a couple of calls or meetings from home in the morning, and I might still go into the office, but a little bit later in the day, which allows us to stagger how many people are in office space at the same time and continue to practice social distancing. So people haven't fully stopped traveling to and from the workplace, depending on the nature of their job, but certainly we're not seeing all those road warriors hit the road at the same time every day to commute to their typical work setting with their regular schedule.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and I want to explore that in a little bit in terms of, we talked about this yesterday with Commissioner Caswell as well, that there are these trends emerging from the impact of COVID-19 that we don't fully understand yet, and we don't understand the permanency of them, but we're starting to get some ideas or some indicators of what they could mean. So, and the kind of the evolution of the commute, I think, is one that seems like one that we could explore a little bit, and we'll have some ramifications for how we think about managing and investing in our infrastructure. Before we dive into that, a couple other things you touched on. Yesterday, we again also talked about the impact of the CARES Act and how the state used a significant chunk of that for business support. And I think I heard you say that CARES Act funding was able to support ports and our airport, but not our highway system. And so I'm wondering if you could just kind of expand on that a little bit and budget impact on the highway system. But then also, are there any conversations? I know there's a lot of concern and interest right now in when Congress will do another relief package, and do you anticipate potentially a highway system or infrastructure being part of that, or broader discussions about another infrastructure package or stimulus package that might entail funding and investing in some of these needs that we talk about each year? I know that's we have an incoming administration and kind of just coming out of an election, so that's kind of still percolating in a moving target. But I'm just curious, what you're hearing, if you're hearing anything from colleagues in other states about what that playing field looks like.
So I'll address the CARES Act piece first. As I mentioned earlier, as soon as COVID-19 hit, our airports and our public transit systems were feeling the effects. especially in the larger metropolitan areas. There are many essential workers who rely on public transportation to get to and from work. So I think when the first CARES Act packages were being contemplated, there was a real need to invest in those areas. And so the first package was $25 billion for our federal transit agency supported operators and providers. Of that, New Hampshire's share was about $39 million. On the aeronautics side, there was a $10 billion package to specifically help airports, and from that, New Hampshire got about $15 million. So those were dedicated sources of funds. It wasn't the Gopher funds that came to the state those different programs that you had to apply for. These were dedicated programs that were laid out in the CARES Act. But in addition, the department, at the request of Gopher, did put forward an additional CARES Act request to try and help out our intercity bus providers, to try and stretch the value of some of the CARES Act money we got through the Federal Transit Administration. We asked for another $7.9 million so we could shore up some of those private bus operators who also provide vital intercity connections. Because it's really essential to New Hampshire's economic success into the future that some of those bus services survive this period and are there for us to rely on into the future. So that's what we got in terms of support for those modes. Unfortunately, while there's been a lot of advocacy for a backstop for lost revenues on the highway side, we have not been as successful in that area. AASHTO is the American Association of State Highway Transportation Officials. I'm actually the president of that association, and last year as vice president I had the opportunity to advocate strongly for investment in transportation. We as AASHTO had been surveying all of our state DOTs to understand what their lost revenue numbers were. And I think in the beginning of the pandemic, we were very concerned these stay-at-home orders were going to be in place for a long period of time and that the near-term impacts on our budgets were going to be significant. What we've seen as time has transpired is that as states were able to flex open like we did in New Hampshire, we've certainly seen a reduction in revenue, but it wasn't as extreme as we had first anticipated. However, because of the lasting impacts of some of the things we talked about earlier, telework, telemedicine, remote learning, etc., our recovery is going to be slower than we thought, and so we're going to have longer term impacts on revenues, but maybe not the size of an impact that we first thought. So at this point, state DOTs are asking for a backstop of about $37 billion to address all of the lost state revenues. There's been this misconception that states are primarily funded with federal funds when it comes to transportation investment, and that is not the truth. About a third of our money in general comes from federal sources, and so our state revenues fund both our routine operations and maintenance of our system, as well as a lot of the construction work, especially on roadways that are lower volume roadways that don't qualify for federal funds. And so the need is significant. Here in New Hampshire, as I mentioned, that reduction in traffic volume does translate to a reduction in revenue. The numbers that we've published are through the end of September, and we have seen about an 18 million reduction in turnpike revenue and about the same when it comes to highway fund revenue. Although DOT does not collect that revenue, it's the Department of Safety that collects what we call the road toll in New Hampshire, or what other states would refer to as gas tax. The one good thing that Congress did do to help us, our federal authorization, the FAST Act, was scheduled to expire in September. They did pass a 1-year extension of the FAST Act, which gives us some predictability for this upcoming construction season. However, it's tied to a continuing resolution. So while they funded us for a year, we're only authorized to spend the first $9 billion. We're waiting for the CR to either be lifted or extended on December 11th. That's a little problematic for cold weather states like us in New Hampshire, because we like to try and get as many projects advertised as possible in those first couple of quarters of the year. And then the other thing that people really don't understand is that On the highway side, our highways have not been paying for themselves. We have not been able to fund all of the necessary investments with highway fund revenues at the federal level. And so there's been a general fund infusion into the Highway Trust Fund. So that was the other thing that was very concerning to all of us when we saw the gas tax receipts dip. We were very concerned that there wasn't going to be sufficient funding to ensure there was timely reimbursement of state expenses that should have been eligible for federal funds. But luckily, Congress did transfer funding into both the mass transit account and into the Highway Trust Fund. So at least we know that we'll have regular cash flow and reimbursement for the expenses that have been authorized to be made. So there's been some positive movement, but it's really been disappointing that on the backstop front, we've really seen no support. So in this lame duck session, that's what we're advocating for the most, is some help for lost revenues. And then once we get into the new year with the new administration, we're hoping to get a 5 or 6 year longer term reauthorization package, so we have some sense of what our federal program could look like.
Well, I think across the board, there's agreement, whether it's on infrastructure funding, transportation funding, business support, PPP funding, all the things that we're looking for. Hopefully, Congress will act soon on some of these items, and whether it's in a lame duck or in the coming session. So we'll be sure to keep an eye on that. Want to pivot to a couple of questions from our audience that have been submitted. And I'll kind of bundle them together since I think they're both kind of forward-facing, future-facing type of questions. One is an update on regarding projects intended to support electric vehicle infrastructure within the DOT network, and also is DOT participating in any autonomous vehicle projects? So EV infrastructure and autonomous vehicle, where do those stand kind of on DOT's plate right now?
So there actually were two different bodies established in legislation that the department has been working closely with. The first was the Electric Vehicle Charging Commission. That body is actually wrapping up their work at this time, and I think a lot of the duties will be transferred to the Transportation Council that was established a couple of years ago. The EV Commission has been looking at sort of the statewide strategic vision for electric charging infrastructure, as well as working closely with the Office of Strategic Initiatives, who are trying to put out RFPs and make sure that we put to good use the funding that came from the VW settlement that the state secured. So we're really, as DOT, trying to support those efforts and determine what role we should be playing. I know, talking to my colleagues across the country, state DOTs play a critical role when it comes to helping to identify which corridors need to have the charging infrastructure, and we certainly can help with modeling where there are deficiencies in the network, so that we can have some targeted expansion and make sure that our visitors in particular that come to New Hampshire don't have to have range anxiety and be fearful that there isn't adequate charging to meet their needs. And then on the autonomous and connected vehicle side, the department has been partnering with several other state DOTs and following the work of states like Michigan and Pennsylvania that are a little bit further ahead in terms of CAV deployment. There was legislation passed last year, and there is another commission that was established to take on this particular issue, both working with DMV as well as DOT and other stakeholders. We, as the Department of Transportation, are very excited to have a closer working relationship with some of the car manufacturing companies, because we really want to know how the connected technology piece is going to impact our work. So we, for many years, have been building out what we call our ITS network, our Intelligent Transportation Systems. You've probably all seen the dynamic message signs out on the highway We also have cameras so that we can monitor accidents and incidents and see what the queuing and backup might be from events on the highway. And then we also have a lot of weather information stations and those types of devices. Understanding how we could share that data with vehicles to help inform the operation of that vehicle. For example, if we suddenly have a drop in temperatures and roads are icing, to be able to broadcast that data and have cars respond accordingly and drive for the conditions. Those are potentially life-saving technologies. And so we were excited to have this new commission established so that we could really elevate some of the programs and initiatives the department would like to pursue and make sure that we have the legislative support to really get those off the ground. So still in its infancy, but we're optimistic that we'll be able to get some traction in the next 1 to 2 years.
Great. Another question from our audience that I want to get to is relevant to here in Manchester. So downtown Manchester has densities beyond surface parking, and these places need new transit options and associated public parking structures in order to unlock mid-rise development opportunities. Are there ways the state can play a more active role in investing in urban transportation solutions within New Hampshire's cities? And this maybe, I think, is linked to, you may be aware that there's been a TOD planning project underway here in Manchester, looking at kind of the southern elm, mill yard, a big space that we have in the southern part of the downtown area that we can unlock a lot of potential new development tied to transit-oriented development. So I'm curious if you have any thoughts on that, if you're familiar with that project, but also, what role this DOT and the state could play potentially in moving some of those projects forward, or initiatives like that forward in cities like Manchester.
I think as a department, we've been very willing to engage and help explore options that will allow folks to pursue multimodal solutions to the problems that we've been facing. However, COVID-19 is going to have lasting impacts when it comes to 4 different areas. So we talked about the morning commute and people commuting to traditional office space. That's going to probably look very different into the future, whether it's because businesses are trying to reduce their overheads and shrink their square footage by having more people telework, or whether it's part of workforce retention strategies to provide transportation system, as well as just how land use will be modified in response to that. Then we have telemedicine, which is changing the delivery of healthcare. So again, that plays a role in terms of how many people are coming into communities for those types of services. And then while we're all very eager to get school-age children back in the classroom, I think we're going to see colleges continue to offer online and hybrid classes, which also impacts travel patterns. You think of a city like Boston and how many educational institutions they have, and how the population of the city rises and falls when the students come and go. And then the last piece is retail. And as we all embrace delivery to our doorstep, and we're making less trips, what will be the lasting impacts of those things? And so all of this now plays into how we approach solving problems. Prior to COVID, we were seeing and experiencing certain challenges, whether it was parking, need for more public transit. We need to know how into the future behaviors are going to change, and maybe some of those problems don't exist anymore, or maybe the problem is still there, but the solution has to look different. And so certainly, DOT, we need a seat at the table as people are talking about their long-term land use, and as planning boards are strategizing on how They want to work with their chambers and others to ensure that the community is vibrant and successful. You have to be thinking about your transportation connections and solutions. Too many times we're asked to come in at the last step in the process and provide those connections, as opposed to being at the table and trying to determine how we can have the most efficiency from the existing system by partnering and working together. And I really the last thing I want to see is a developer sitting across the table from a community with an idea, and it's the first time that community is thinking about what they really want their downtown in particular to look like. I think folks need to do a lot more pre-work, especially as we fully reopen post-COVID and we see how some of these lasting technology solutions will change, especially our more urban centers. We need to be very quick to strategize and think about how we're going to react, and then that way you can maximize opportunities versus reacting to them at the last moment.
Good segue to talking about kind of some of these trends that we're seeing and what the future impact could be. Just to kind of recap for everybody, I think it was interesting to hear you kind of break down and give a little specificity to kind of what we all think of as driving around, but the different types of reasons that we drive around. That it was, work, school, healthcare, telemedicine, and retail, and how, if you look at all four of those things, COVID-19 has had a huge impact on all four. This commute of the future is really one that we don't know the answer to yet. We have some sense of the trends. We were talking with Commissioner Caswell about this yesterday, that when it comes to remote work, there was obviously a big shift across many industries to embrace remote work in the short term as a public health outcome. But through that, I think many industries have discovered that there's some permanency to this, that employees like it. It provides more flexibility. There may be some cost savings with how they then think about their office space. So we have to see how that bounces back. And, that may then impact, to your point earlier about, commuting trends. It will impact commuting trends. And I think I've had the same experience as you have, that I'm still coming into the office a few days a week, but the timeframes in which I'm coming in are changing. And I'm wondering, has there been any discussion nationally and other places about, what this kind of evolution of the commute could mean for certain for our road infrastructure, for our transportation systems? And we've built our infrastructure for so many years to be supportive of rush hours in the morning and in the evening. And if there's some permanency to these trends and it starts to shift that, I can't quite wrap my mind around yet what that means. And perhaps it's probably too early for you to know too, but I'm wondering, as a transportation planner, what are some of the outcomes or the flags that we should be looking at or thinking about as we're trying to assess, like, well, how should we think about this differently if our commuting trends are going to really shift in the long term permanently?
So already in certain parts of the country, they're seeing the total vehicle miles traveled rebounding, and yet there is no commute. If you look at the corridors that typically would have been heavily congested, there's no traffic. So what's happening is, for example, if you lived outside of a major metropolitan city, maybe you commuted 10 miles each way to and from work. If you live in the suburbs, you're now working from home, whereas in the past, when you worked in the city, you maybe walked down to the sub shop at lunchtime, or you walked to grab a coffee. When you have a break between your Zoom or Teams calls now and you're working at home, you're jumping in your car and you're running down to a plaza, to the local deli or coffee shop instead. or you're now working from home and you're not stuck in that commute every night, so you have more opportunity to coach your child's soccer team, or do something that you've always wanted to do with those extra hours that you have back in your day. And so that also is leading to shorter trips on the system. And so there's some really interesting data already being published, especially in communities like Chicago, or over on the West Coast. In California, there's a number of the metropolitan cities where they're seeing the same thing. People are driving as much, they're just driving on different roadways and using the system in a different way. And so our transportation models don't really account for this behavior. We're used to looking at past trends and then projecting a certain amount of growth into the future as industry and demands increase. And so it's going to be a really uncertain time for all of us in transportation. And that's why I was talking earlier about the need for us to really partner and understand how businesses are making their decisions and what the long-term ramifications are going to be. In the transportation business, we connect people and places. And more, I'm not connecting the person to a place. The person is staying put. There's technology ensuring that they can still have all of those interactions they used to have in a day. And the movement of goods on the system is becoming even more important, especially with the expansion of Amazon and all the online ordering. But as I said before, we don't want to lose our downtowns. We don't want to lose that sense of place that many communities have been working so hard to create. And so together, we all need to understand how we can have a little bit of everything, make life easier for folks in a day-to-day.
Oh, we might have lost the commissioner there temporarily. Just hold on with us for just a sec, folks. Hey, Commissioner, are you back with us?
So I'm not sure what you caught, but I was saying that we have to be very intentional in our work to make sure that the quality of life and all of the things that attract people to live in New Hampshire in particular are not lost. And so it's going to take a lot of collaboration and planning to make sure that we really recognize those economic opportunities and don't lose what we've come to enjoy. But anytime that we have a dramatic shift like this, there's a lot of opportunity for innovation. And I know that there will be folks on this call in particular who will be thinking about how they can grow their business and thrive during this time. But for us to be successful in the DOT world, we need to be having more sessions like this one and more roundtable discussions so we can understand the decision making that's happening, whether that's at the corporate level or working with small businesses. We will not be successful and will not provide the service that people need if we don't understand how the delivery methods and models are changing.
Well, I think that's it's a fascinating number that you gave in terms, or data point that you gave in terms of vehicle miles traveled are bouncing back, but the commute is no longer there. And, to your point, understanding where those vehicle miles traveled are going. And is it, certainly I know I can attest to, because it seems like they're at my front door every day, the Amazon trucks are accounting for a lot of those miles, or the food delivery, or all those different goods traveling, but are people also traveling in different ways? And I can, with two young kids during the stay-at-home order, sometimes we just needed to go up for a drive to get out of the house. And so I wonder if our secondary roads are going to see more activity if people have more flexibility and more freedom to travel, not tied to one of those four uses that we highlighted. So I think it's a really interesting topic, and perhaps this year, this time next year, when we are, hopefully on the backside of COVID-19 and emerging as a state and as a country from this, we'll have a better sense of some of these trends and be able to start planning around them, because I think you're right, it's a huge shift. We only have time for a couple more questions, so I wanted to have another audience question about, I think, something you talk about each year that'd be good for us to check in on. What is the condition of the state's roads and bridges? And I know that's been an ongoing priority for you, and concerns you have regarding the safety of the road network.
So we are very fortunate because the state passed the 4.2 cents gas tax increase several years ago. And then we were able to secure a federal loan to fund the construction of I-93. We've been investing more significantly in our road and bridge network over the last several years. And so we are currently experiencing some of the best road and bridge condition that the state has seen in a long time. Our concern is in the future, as we start to pay back the principal on the loan that we secured for I-93, that will significantly diminish our capacity. So short term, things are great. And certainly for those individuals who were able to get out and explore a little bit of New Hampshire this summer, with the extra free time we just described, I'm sure you experienced a very different level of condition than even 3-4 years ago. The challenge that we're having is still just longer term, as people are driving more fuel efficient vehicles. We are still seeing our revenues either flat or slightly declining. And so that will bring challenges for the department. And this year in particular, with trying to practice social distancing and keep our staff healthy, we are being tested in new ways. So coming into this winter season in particular, we have been doing a lot of preparation and planning, but we have had challenges attracting a workforce. And so it depends on the severity of the winter, how much Mother Nature tests us each year. But if we were to have a lot of severe winter storms that were statewide, I know the department would struggle at times. So we're always planning for the worst and hoping for the best, and doing everything that we can to make sure that we provide the same level of service that we have in the past. But I'm not going to say that COVID-19 hasn't impacted our performance in that area. So overall condition is good, but on the operations side of the house, we are stretched very thin at the moment. And that's really where we're challenged the most.
Well, Commissioner, I would say just, your one's perspective is often influenced by what they see and observe close to home. And, I can say locally here in our area, as someone who travels 101 in Bedford daily, I give your team and DOT and all the partners who worked on that project really high marks, because I think it has made an enormous difference in terms of safety along that road, and the quality of work and speed in which it happened over the last couple of years was really impressive. And it's also really increased the aesthetic of the area, and some of the work that went into adding walkways and landscaping and some of the features of it. So I know that's work that is happening in other parts of the state as well, but that's what's close to home to us here. So I appreciate the work that your department and all the partners and local partners that are involved in that have been able to do, even while all this has been happening over the last several months. That work has continued unabated. So we really appreciate that. I think we are kind of running up on time, so I think it would be a good point to wrap up. Commissioner, any closing words? Are there any, if people are interested in learning more, or following along with the department and your progress, anything specifically you would guide them towards on the DOT website, or things that they should keep their eye on in the upcoming legislative session and along those lines?
So the other positive outcome of COVID-19 is that we've really embraced virtual tools to conduct a lot of our public meetings. You talked about the 101 project. That's a perfect example of a location where we're trying to provide better regional connectivity, but also listening to a community to make sure that we're providing the features and facilities that would support their goals as well, with sidewalks and a more aesthetically pleasing corridor, as you described it. So if people want to get more engaged, I know it's been a struggle in the past to find times to get to public meetings, but please check out our website, follow us on our social media channels. We're doing a lot more virtual public engagement. All of our meetings that we've had to host virtually during COVID-19 have been really well attended, and we're reaching a broader group of stakeholders. So I just encourage you to not miss out on that opportunity.
I think that's really great advice and guidance, because while I know we're all stretched pretty thin on virtual meetings these days, if there's one meeting that I think has been a struggle for public engagement in the past, it's those, whether it's municipal or state public meetings that a lot of times are happening at 7 o'clock at night or 6 o'clock at night, and you have to drag yourself out to town hall or something like that to go to it. I think there's a number of trends that have come up through, this pandemic that I hope stick around, and I hope have some permanency to them. And I think public engagement through virtual formats in those types of meetings would be a great thing to keep in the long term, because it's just going to allow so many more people, working families, folks with young kids, to be able to follow along and perhaps participate in those things. That often it's a struggle to get out to those. So I appreciate you flagging that. That's not something I had thought of, but I think that's a great potential outcome from this type of environment that we've had to operate in.
And the same is true of the legislative process. We are very proud of our citizen legislature, and the fact that every bill in New Hampshire gets a hearing. I think the House in particular is grappling with how to approach this next session, but it's very likely that even if they resume some in-person meetings, there's going to be a hybrid component. And so it's going to be much easier for people to take advantage of that opportunity you have in New Hampshire to testify and to have your say when it comes to proposed legislation. So I'd encourage you to also check out the legislative calendar. And instead of having to go to a meeting and sit through a lot of testimony to wait your turn, you'll be able now to participate in that way, which is much more efficient for everyone.
Yeah. Well, Commissioner, thanks so much for taking some time on short notice to join us at our EDI Summit. We really appreciate you being a longtime supporter and participant in this event, and hopefully next year we'll be welcoming you back in person and be able to gather together. But in the meantime, stay safe, stay healthy, and best of luck and wishes to you and your team coming up with the winter season, which I know is potentially really busy. So we'll be thank you for all your work, and we'll be pulling for you guys to have a good, successful, safe season.
Thank you. Great to be with you all.
Thanks again to all of our sponsors: Comcast, Citizens Bank, Northeast Delta Dental, Amoskeag Industries, Bedford Cost Segregation, Eversource Energy, TF Moran, and Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare. And a quick reminder and plug that we will be back tomorrow at noon for our last session, our last speaker session, with Ted Kitchens from Manchester Boston Regional Airport. Ted has a great presentation discussion plan that we'll be working on with him related to impact to the airport, the airline industry. Obviously a really important hot topic for us to dive into, given the airport's importance to us as an economic driver. So hope to see you all then tomorrow, noon, back here on the same channel. Thanks everybody. Have a great day. We'll see you again soon.